Greetings everyone, I hope you are fine, I hope you are doing well. In this video, I would like to play you a short clip and I would like to encourage you to watch this clip to an end. But while doing so, please read the entire atmosphere. Listen and read the atmosphere in the video and tell me what you think.
We're not going to discuss any other thing. Never. What is it that needs to be discussed? It's safe passage out of our business space. We don't say they must not be here. Your immigration must deal with that one. To say they are operating in the illegal. Here it's about contestation of the business space. We are there. We are saying our business must be respected. You see, they must go out of spaza shops. They must go out of salons. They must go out of selling veggies. That's what the law says. Then you can come with that convention, the convention which will say when you exit, when there are conflicts in your country, the first exit is your next country. It never say you must come all the way up there, passing 10 countries to come and settle here. And it is having a period to stay. It does not permit you to stay more than 4 years if there are conflicts. That is the United Nations Convention. Unfortunately, you are talking to I'm a lawyer of interpreting these laws on my own. I don't need any certification. La. And then record the job and so. And I'm going to post it so that the minister get it. Sure. Bye-bye.
The first thing that came in my mind is 1994. Why? Because in most cases, the moment they say you have to sit down and discuss, when there's justice, when there's law and order, then you have to know that in most cases, they want to bypass the law. They want to bypass justice. They want to ignore everything. For an example, when you read the atmosphere, this is based on my perception. I know we may differ, but I can tell that the people in that video were already in disagreement with the gentleman who is talking in this video. In other words, they are in disagreement with someone who is quoting the law. They are not even ready to debate that law. They're not even ready to discuss that law. Why? Because they already have their own solutions. They've decided already what to do. But we have to know that in most cases, it won't benefit the South Africans. That is why justice is so important. So that is why when you put this whole thing on a scale of justice, so you can tell that there's no justice for South Africans because there's a law on the table, but people want to bypass the law. They've created the very same constitution. The constitution is saying one thing, but they are doing something else. That is why South Africa is called a banana republic, even if we don't want to admit, but you can tell that indeed it's a banana republic. Why? Because now everybody wants to do as they please. It's like, for an example, in a community or in a township, there will be that individual who will act as if is above the law and dictate everybody to do things the way they think, not according to the law. That is why I always say this thing of like no one is above the law is a scam, because there are people who are above the law. There are people who are above the law because they are always ready to complicate the law. This is what we need to understand. Here is the thing. Even the very same act, even the very same section, they will try by all means to contradict it, to complicate it, so that at the end of the day we say, okay, we didn't understand. Why? Because the law is fair, but the people who are analyzing this law are always in error. Why? Because they have their own intentions. So in 1994, people were like, let's negotiate, let's discuss. But guess the outcome of that negotiation is selling out. I know some people might disagree, But my perception is that the outcome was selling out. That is why today we have another battle, that we have a crisis in South Africa, the crisis of unemployment, the crisis whereby now children are dying. You don't even know what's going on. Some people might say this is a propaganda. Some people might say this is other businesses doing this because they want to take over, and etc. and etc. But the most important thing is that here is the crisis. But on top of that, we have law. In other words, we have to sit down and say, South Africa has been doing things out of order without following the law. This is a fact. In other words, things were being done here in South Africa without following the law. That is why we are where we are today. Why? Because you don't follow the law. But in other countries, they do follow the law. In other countries, they do follow the law. You cannot go to Ethiopia right now. You cannot go to Somalia. You cannot go to Egypt. You cannot go to Burkina Faso. You cannot go to Uganda and do as you please. There's a law and order. But people always want to be in a space where there's no law and order. You can come here because we can do as we want. Then obviously people will come because they know that there's no order. Because we as human beings, we love where there's no order. So that is why they skip all these countries. They skip all these countries, Northern Africa, Central Africa, to come to South Africa. Why? Why? It's because it's a banana republic. It's a banana republic. No one is following the law. They want to sit and discuss without following the law. For an example, this gentleman here has quoted a simple Immigration Act. Application for a business visa. In terms of Section 15.1 of the Immigration Act, number 13 of 2002, a person who intends investing in the South African economy by establishing a business or by investing in an existing business in the country must apply for a business visa. As an applicant, you will be required to invest a prescribed financial capital contribution. If I'm not mistaken, is 5 million in South African rands, if I'm not mistaken. Provided that A, such foreigner invests the prescribed financial or capital contribution in such business. The capital contribution forms part of the intended book value of the business, and such foreigner has undertaken to comply with any relevant registration requirement set out in any law administered by SARS, and employ the prescribed percentage or number of South African citizens or permanent residents within a period of 12 months from the date of issue of the visa. Even the types of businesses they should be involved in are limited as well. In other words, you have to invest a certain amount of money. This is in accordance of the law. Why is so difficult to follow the law? Just to follow the law and do what is right and be just to the people of South Africa, because right now this is a crisis. This is something that should have been prevented long time ago. It should have been prevented long time ago. But because we don't follow the laws, in most cases in South Africa, the law and order is not followed. Is not followed. So that is why it's so easy and simple for people to do as they please. In other words, South African government should admit that they have not been following the law. They have to admit this, that we are where we are today because they were not following the law, because we are living in a country whereby you can do whatever you want. If you want to initiate your own rule, your own laws, you cannot do so. That is why it's easy for us to sit down and negotiate with intentions of bypassing the law. In other countries, you cannot do this. You go to Eswatini, there's law and order. You go to DRC, there's law and order. You go to Burkina Faso, there's law and order. That is why I always say it's going to take time for Africa to unite. Why? Because it's like we have oil and water. We have oil and water, and they don't mix. That is why you have the likes of Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. In other words, they've separated themselves from these other people, because the rest of Africa is led by people, in most of them don't have intentions to prioritize Africans or to do good for the people they are leading in order to unite Africa. So people who are singing the unity of Africa are those who don't have power. And at the end of the day, they want to do it at the expense of oppressing others. Because when you put this thing on a scale of justice, you can tell that there are injustices that are done against South Africans. Because right now we have oil and water, and most of these people don't even care about African unity. That is why Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso can't mix with the rest of countries, because the rest of countries are led by puppets. When it comes to the law has to be followed. The law has to be followed. Even the kinds or the types of businesses they should engage in are also limited. Not every business, even when it comes to employment, is also limited. So if you say you love Africans, you love your brothers and sisters, if you love South Africans, how do you feel if they are not being employed by these companies in South Africa? You get employed, but they are not being employed. How do you feel about that? So that is why I believe that there's a lot of injustices against South Africans, and these politicians should not be trusted. In other words, we should not rely on politicians. That is why we have to rely on the very same law to say, but the law says 1, 2, 3, but you are acting in a certain way. Because these people were so quick to go to ICC and say there are injustices that are happening in Palestine. There are injustices that are happening in Palestine. But they are failing to acknowledge that there are injustices that are happening to their own, the South Africans. In other words, they ignore the challenges, the crisis in South Africa. I don't know what you think about the whole situation. I have different perspective, and I believe that there are people who are just above the law, and whenever they want to, they will always bypass the law. But what can South Africans do is to hold these people accountable and say, but the law says this. This is what the law is saying. But again, at the same time, that is why it is important to understand these laws and read them accordingly. Because all of a sudden, they will be amended. They will be amended in order to silence who? In order to silence the South Africans. This is planned. This is intended This is something that is made up. That is why if you are an African and you say, I'm for Africans, you should not be happy when you see injustices done against South Africans. For an example, let's say you get employed, but you can see that South Africans are not getting employed. Then you have to ask yourself a question. What is going on? You have to know at that time that you yourself, you're also being used as a slave.